This was probably like 6 months into my time at Yext, and I had gone through and I sort of, uncovered a lot of the skeletons, and I was like, okay, we did like a team meeting. There was only like, 8 or 10 people on the team. Many of them were new. And like, I had all the time in the world because like, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I was working every weekend, and I'm like, here's my vision for what needs to happen. If I just give them the roadmap, it'll just get us there faster. And it was awful. Because, what I realized was like, they didn't want the roadmap. They wanted to go find the problems, come up with their own solutions, and implement their own solutions. And it made a ton of sense because it's like, nobody was telling me what to do. Somebody was just telling me like, hey, this thing is kind of a mess. Go fix it. It wasn't like, here's the mess, here's the individual problems, and here's what you should do. So from that point on, I learned like a really important lesson in how, people want to operate.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast. Man, I'm getting some deja vu. I'm actually recording this intro from my parents' basement. Yeah, I've really had a come up, huh? This is actually where I started the Mostly Metrics newsletter 4 years ago, if you can believe that. Well, you can take the kid out of the basement, but you can't take I don't know where I'm going with that. But today's guest is Darryl Bond, the Chief Financial Officer of Yext, a tech company you probably know today as a public platform approaching $500 million in ARR. But when Darryl joined in 2015, it was a very different story. It was lean, it was private, and it was a little more than scrappy. And since then, he's risen from controller to CFO, weathered executive turnover, company-wide resets, and the quiet thrill of optimizing a finance function most people don't fully understand. And through it all, he's only worked for 2 companies in the past 23 years, folks. He's playing the long game. That's essentially unicorn status in tech, if not a full-blown museum exhibit. We'll ask whether that kind of loyalty is about values, timing, or just really good snacks in the office. In this conversation, we will unpack how to spot inflection points in your own career, why the messiest problems can lead to the biggest growth, and what operational excellence actually looks like when the numbers get tough. We also get into the nuts and bolts of capital allocation, investor storytelling, finance tech stacks, and what it means to lead with transparency when the market isn't exactly cheering you on. I'm cheering Yext on. They've had quite the comeback here in the public markets. Darryl is a great guy, an awesome CFO, and I think I want to be him when I grow up. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI-powered this and automated that, but here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials and making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit RightRev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's RightRev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. This episode of Run the Numbers is brought to you by Navan, the all-in-one travel and expense solution. CFOs and finance leaders, let's be honest here. Your T&E process is broken. Manual reconciliations waste valuable time, policy violations drain money, and limited visibility creates unnecessary risk. Nobody likes that. Navan cuts through these problems, giving finance teams the clarity and control needed to close with confidence, faster and with fewer headaches. Connect your existing eligible Visa, MasterCard, or American Express cards directly to Navan and keep all your card rewards and banking relationships. Get real-time expense tracking, automated policy enforcement, and AI-powered reconciliation that works. Companies like Anthropic, Unilever, and Zoom trust Navan to manage travel spend smarter and increase compliance. Are you ready to modernize your T&E process? Visit navan.com/run the numbers for your demo today. That's navan.com/run the numbers. Tell them CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Morgan Stanley recently said NetSuite is under the threat of disruption. That's right. NetSuite, you never get fired for buying its software. So what's the threat? The answer, Rillet. Rillet is the AI native ERP modern finance teams are switching to because it's faster, simpler, and 100% built for how teams operate today. It doesn't take 12 months to implement. It doesn't feel like filing taxes to use, and your accounting team will actually love it. PostScript closes the books in only 3 days. Windsurf, bet you heard of them. They run finance with just 2 people. And Rillet is backed by Sequoia Capital. Yes, that's Sequoia. Unicorns like PostScript and Windsurf and hundreds of other companies have made the switch, and they're closing books in record time. If I were running a finance team today, I wouldn't default to legacy. I'd look at what's coming next, and Rillet is here. You don't want to be that guy at cocktail parties complaining about how bad his ERP is. Wait, am I the only guy who talks about ERPs around a keg? See how fast your team can move. Book a demo at rillet.com/metrics. That's RILLET.com/metrics. RILLET.com/metrics. Darryl, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast.
Thanks, CJ. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
It's fun because we actually got to meet at a dinner that I held in New York City for a bunch of CFOs. Usually it's the other way around where I have people on the show and then I try to recruit them to my dinner. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, no, it was an awesome dinner, awesome event. Met some great people that I'm still talking to today. So it's good.
There we go. Value add for all the sponsors too. Just so you know. Darryl, you've only worked for 2 companies in 23 years. Like I had to refresh your LinkedIn bio there because that's like unicorn status in tech. So was that loyalty, luck, or did they just have like really good coffee at the places that you worked?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I actually didn't start drinking coffee until a year or 2 into my tenure at Yext. Okay. So I was like 35, 36, never really drank coffee, but I guess when you go through an IPO, you kind of have to jump on that wagon. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of loyalty, but I think it's also perseverance and a ton of luck, right? Especially in tech, there's, to be at a tech company for 10 plus years, it doesn't really happen a whole lot for just a variety of factors. Obviously the macro can more recently has impacted a lot of that, but, I kind of knew coming out of E&Y, I wanted to go into tech and kind of knew what I was looking for, which was really learning and growth opportunities. It was really not so much about, what's the offer going to be? What's the title going to be? Because I'd done almost 13 years in public, which is a long time. And it was really just about, in this next phase of my career, where am I going to learn the most? What's going to be the opportunities that become available? So it was really just about the learning and the growth. In fact, I had found Yext through my network at E&Y. It was an audit client of the firm. And one of the old audit partners that I used to work with was telling me about the company. I was like, that sounds pretty interesting. They hadn't hired a CFO yet. This is back in 2014. And for me, it was really important who the CFO that they hired to take them public was going to be. And, funny enough, I was reading the Wall Street Journal on my way to work one day and see a headline, Yext hires Steve Cakebread to go through an IPO. I was like, well, that sounds pretty interesting. And then I looked up his background and I saw Salesforce, Pandora, Autodesk. I was like, whatever the job is, whatever the title is, whatever the comp is, that sounds like a pretty good place to be. So that's how I ended up here. It's been great ever since.
It's pretty uncommon these days to hear somebody say like, whatever the comp is, whatever the title is, I just want to learn. Can you just reflect a bit on that long-term mindset? Yeah,
I think it's really, I don't know if it's unique or like I've met a lot of people that sort of share the same philosophy. So like maybe there's just 2 different camps on this, but for me, I always saw, the opportunities that, really successful people that, they had a lot of different things and they did a lot of different things and they saw good times and they saw bad times. And, I think the bad times sort of, create these sort of battle scars and you just learn from those experiences. And, I think it's easy to hop jobs and, just look for a different title or look for a different comp package. But to me, the experience and the things that are forged in hard times has just in my mind was more rewarding. I mean, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but it's the comfortable zone that I'm in. Like, I'm comfortable operating that way, and it works for me. I think it's really just up to each person to find like what's their balance.
And in good times, everybody wants to get in on it and scoop up the opportunities. In bad times, there's a lot of stuff you can go and grab and learn like on the fly that you probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to own before.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, look, when I moved into the CFO role at Yext, the company was going through a lot of changes. We changed CEO and CFO simultaneously in March of 22. Growth was declining. The P&L was in tough shape. The macro was changing really quickly around us, and we had a lot of work to do. And for me, never being a CFO before, I got a lot of great experience here working closely with Steve, our former CFO, but having never done it before, now going through a pretty big turnaround in a public company environment, in a really tough to understand and predict macroeconomic environment, was just I was like, wow, this is a lot. I don't know if I can chew all of it, but like, it was hard, and it's been hard, but it's been a lot of fun and really, really rewarding. I've seen my own personal growth through the last 3+ years, and it's been great.
And we're going to touch on the peaks and valleys and kind of how you evolved through it. I want to take a step back because everyone knows Yext today as a public tech company. It's approaching $500 million in ARR. But I think when you joined in like 2015, it was private, it was lean, it was pretty scrappy. Can you paint the scene for us? Like, what did the company and I guess the finance function look like when you walked through the door?
Yeah, so the company was probably a couple hundred people, all in New York, in like a corner of a building on one floor, and about 50 million in ARR. And then out of those 300 people, I think there was probably like 5 or 6 in finance total. 2 or 3 in accounting, 3 or 4 in FP&A, and that was basically it. And it was what you'd expect of a $50 million business, right? Like, they were, they had found product market fit, and a lot of those companies, you don't invest in G&A really until you need to. And for the company at the time, the IPO market was starting to heat up, and we saw our window. And that's when we just really invested in the G&A function and put in a lot of systems and process. My favorite story to tell about my first week on the job was, we're sitting in the accounting department, which is just like a couple desks over in the corner of a corner. And there's this wire basket behind where I was sitting. And like, every once in a while, people, like, this is my first week, people I didn't know or recognize were coming and putting stuff in that basket. And like, eventually I was like, guys, well, what is going on over here? And it was like, oh, that's people just dropping off expense reports, because we gave them an Excel template. They would fill out the template, staple the receipts, and put them in that basket. And I was like, wow, the reluctance to invest in systems is really showing up here. So, one of the first things we did was just put in a bunch of systems and process to get some control over what was happening. But yeah, I don't think it's uncommon for companies at that stage to delay the investment as long as you can.
I'm getting like flashbacks of like dropping off like TPS reports,
yes,
something like that. That's old school.
Yeah.
Any like I don't know, counterintuitive or non-traditional skills you think that benefit somebody when they're coming into like their first finance role like that at a smaller company?
I think it's really just being adaptable and like, look, depending on how much experience you have coming in. For me, I had 12 years of experience at E&Y, looking at really small private companies that were in similar situations to really big public, multinational companies. So like, I kind of knew like both ends of the spectrum, and just like, okay, look, we're not going to fix everything or put in, this perfect situation in, a quarter or even a couple quarters. It's going to take multiple years to move along the journey, and just, figure out what's the highest priority. For us, it was oddly not expense reports. It was lead to cash and making sure that we were doing everything correctly there. But it's just, pick the problems, prioritize them, and just continually sort of reevaluate what you're focused on and what your priorities and pain points are. And just, be willing to do whatever it takes to move the company forward, because it's going to be a small, lean team.
Yeah. And I asked that too, because I came from the PwC world before crossing over, and like there, your work product is everything. Like, that's all you have to sell. Like, that PowerPoint slide better look good. I know you were also on the audit side in addition to the transaction side. And then you come into a startup and you realize like, oh, we're just purely measured on like the progress we make and the revenue. And it's kind of like this weird feeling because you're like, oh, it doesn't always have to be perfect in order to move the ball forward here. But like, I'm so used to like making it perfect.
Yeah, no, a funny story was, I think one of the first things I took on here, just from an accounting perspective, was like, we weren't really looking at the lease accounting. We were doing it like on a cash basis, not on a GAAP accrual basis. And I was like, oh, I know lease account. I know enough about lease accounting to be dangerous. And I wrote up a memo, and like, it was like a professional, like, this is what I would have done if I were working at E&Y. And I think I gave it to Steve. I'm like, hey, like, here's the memo. And I was expecting like comments, and like 10 minutes later, I get an email like, yeah, this looks great. Thanks. I was like, oh, it's a different environment than what I was in. And, making that transition, it takes a little bit of time.
I had something like that too. I think I did like a write-up on like our 409A valuation, and it took me forever. And the CEO just like emailed back like, cool, period. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That took me forever.
Yep.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. As a CFO, you're expected to bring clarity to everything, including how your company manages ownership. The tools you use should make that easier, not harder. But when they come with hidden fees, data you can't always trust, and support you can't rely on, you end up with more frustration than clarity. That's where Pulley comes in. Pulley is the cap table management platform built for finance leaders who need accurate, decision-ready data from a system that works for your business, not against it. With Pulley, you get intuitive workflows, audit-ready reporting, and support you can count on, all backed by predictable pricing you can plan around, so you can stay compliant and make smarter decisions about your company's future. Manage everything from fundraise modeling to ASC 718 reporting to custom liquidity programs, all on one trusted platform. Hundreds of high-growth companies like Linear, Fathom, and Runway trust Pulley to help turn ownership into a strategic advantage. And joining them is now easier than ever. You can switch to Pulley in as little as 5 days. And for a limited time, they're offering 25% off your first year. To claim your exclusive offer, visit pulley.com/mostlymetrics. That is pulley.com/mostlymetrics. pulley.com/mostlymetrics. Listen, being a CFO, it's not always that glamorous. Sometimes I find myself watering the plants and taking out the garbage in the office. And, the best CFOs I know they're true business leaders. They know how to drive growth in heroic fashion. Unfortunately, the status quo of finance makes that really hard because day to day, we're mostly up to our eyeballs in spreadsheets and receipts. Thankfully, there's a financial provider who has built a solution to match your ambition, Brex. Brex designed a modern corporate card and spend platform that controls spend proactively and automates tedious expense and accounting tasks. Brex frees up CFOs to focus on the high-impact projects that drive growth. The shit that's actually worth your CFO time. So how does Brex work? You can embed your expense policy inside the corporate card to prevent out-of-policy spend before it happens. Receipts and memos are auto-generated, so you always have what you need to close the books fast. Managers get freed up from reviewing, every possible expense under the sun because in-policy expenses are auto-approved, and AI will flag any exceptions. And all the while, your expense detail is syncing with your ERP because Brex integrates with almost all of them. I love that, from QuickBooks to NetSuite. It's your time to shine as the strategic growth driver you are, and Brex can make it easy. More than 30,000 companies like DoorDash, Coinbase, and SeatGeek use Brex to make every dollar and every minute count. Join them at brex.com/metrics. That's brex.com/metrics. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. And so I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. So I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com, aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you.
I want to talk about raising your hand and saying, just give me that messy problem. I'm going to sort it out. Yep. Because it's not always obvious which messes are actually worth your time to clean up, especially at a company that's moving pretty fast. Can you maybe share one or two projects that you took on without knowing if it would move your title, your comp, or if it would pay off in hindsight?
Yeah, like I think it's, anything that you think is going to move the company forward is probably worth spending your time on. Like some of the stuff that we did really early on was all about systems. We didn't have really any systems to just sort of track and report the numbers. And I think the first year I was here was really just running from systems meeting to systems meeting, because we were putting in an ERP, we were putting in an expense system, we were putting in a billing and rev rec system, we were putting in a purchasing, procure to pay system. So I didn't have any practical experience in doing those things, but I kind of knew what the outcome needed to be. And, I'm glad I went through it. It was really painful at the time, and we made plenty of mistakes along the way that we had to correct over the ensuing years. But I think that was one. And then the other was, probably a couple years into my tenure here, we realized revenue growth was high. The sales team we were adding a lot of sales reps. It was a lot of growth, and we didn't really have a formal deal desk function. So, myself and one of the other folks in our team that was really close to billing and rev rec and collections was like, the company needs this. We should build it. And, we took the sort of approach of look, we're going to go throughout the organization, particularly in sales and the exec team, and say, look, this doesn't exist. Here's what we think the charter could be or should be. And here's what we think the outcomes will be and how they'll help the company. And, now that team is thriving.
Can we zoom in on the deal desk piece for a second here?
Yeah.
When's the right time, you think, for a company to create a deal desk? Is it an amount of revenue, or is it more just around complexity around getting the cash?
I think it's probably complexity and your go-to-market motion. When I first joined, that 50 million was probably mostly direct to small business and some reseller. And that was around the time we started to generate probably, 5 to 10 million of real true enterprise logo revenue. And, we just started to get into much bigger deals, more complicated procurement cycles, more complicated deal structuring. And if you just leave the sales reps to their own devices, they're going to come up with, all these crazy things. And then good luck trying to rev rec it on the back end. So we were just look, we can create this mechanism to create flexibility, but also guardrails so people knew what they could and couldn't do. So I think it really depends on, just how far up market you're going and what the level of variability in your structures are.
And when you have a sales rep negotiating the T's and C's, that's probably not a great use of negotiation leverage, and also not a great use of their time.
Yeah, no, totally. I think, it was funny, when we walked in, a lot of the folks on the sales team were either signing contracts on behalf of the company, or somebody was in sales was anointed the signer. So it just, the level of process and structure, again, it just makes sense for where the company was at. But there's just, I think every company is in a similar type of situation at that level.
I've also been trying to evaluate when the right time is to bring Counsel in-house, because you could have a $5 million company, but maybe it's sitting in the middle of two other companies, and that can get complex in negotiations. But you could also have a pretty straightforward $100 million company that's just doing pretty boring and vanilla SaaS deals.
Yeah. No, for us, I think it was kind of around the same time. So when I got hired, I think within a couple of weeks, we hired a general counsel, and it was more so to focus on the pre-IPO stuff and just get things where we needed to be. And that just sort of as the company continued to mature and go further up market and do a lot more enterprise work, then we realized, okay, in addition to deal desk, we need commercial counsel focused on, helping the sellers negotiate the terms and bring some standardization into the contracts. But again, I think that was mostly dictated by just where we were going in the market.
I think a lot of what we're talking about too, Darryl, relates to when you ask for help. And you've said it's harder to figure out things when you're on your own. And I can tell that like you're also a type A personality who wants to like take on new challenges. But I guess the flip side of that is like, what's a time when you leaned on someone else's wisdom to get by?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like when I walked into the building, day one here at Yext, like my only background was effectively consulting, right? Mm-hmm. Where you go out and you look at a company or you look at a business and you think you know what their problems are and you offer up solutions that you may not ultimately see get implemented or not, and you don't know if they're good solutions or not, to now you own the problem, you own the outcome. If you screw it up, you own the fix. And for me, I was like, I don't have time to sort of trial and error this and screw things up and go fix them. So like, I'd rather, build a network. So I use the folks that I knew to connect me to other controllers in similar stage tech companies. Like, what did you do to solve this problem? How did you go through that? Like software RevRec, SaaS RevRec was, relatively new to me, as was setting up billing and automation and all the systems and even deal desk. Like deal desk was a new thing for us that we hadn't done before. So it was really, who can we talk to that has been there, done that? So like, at least we can learn from their past experiences and not repeat their mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. We know that, but if you can kind of limit them or find the most efficient path, it's a little bit easier that way.
I've also been surprised like how willing people are to talk to me and give me advice. Like I think at first, when I was raising my hand, I was like, how the hell do I run an employee secondary or something here? I was like, I'm going to look so dumb asking this CFO who I met through my network, who I only kind of know, for advice on something that like from the outside, like, dude, how do you not know how to do this? Like, am I going to expose myself as a fraud here? But I learned that everybody kind of has all these questions and they only know because they asked somebody else.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And getting comfortable with that, I think takes time, right? Like I don't know, I think, our CEO, Mike, and I were talking really early into my tenure in the CFO role, and the topic of imposter syndrome came up. And, he's like, look, you actually, you know a lot more, you've got a lot more experience than you sort of give yourself credit for. And I think, look, I might be really well-versed in some areas and not well-versed in others, but then there's going to be some other person across the table that is in a similar situation. Maybe they're not as well versed in the things that I am and vice versa. So you don't really understand that or figure that out until you just get comfortable putting yourself out there, like being okay to ask what could be a dumb question. It could also be a question that other person has. And, you just don't know until you just sort of put it out there.
What I finally got comfortable with too, because I was afraid at first when I became a CFO for the first time, the CEO was going to be like, I hired someone who doesn't know what he's doing, that he hired me because he knew that I could figure out how to do it by asking other people if necessary. Honestly, that's why he liked this podcast, because I was doing it when I still had that job. He's like, oh, you can call up one of 50 people that you've had on the show. But that just got me comfortable with being like, okay, it's natural for me to go out, and the CEO probably asks people for advice too.
No, yeah, totally. I think it happens, way more than people would think. For me, I went through the same exact thing. I'm like, I've never been a public company CFO. We're going through this massive turnaround. Like, why am I the right guy? But, look, like you just, like I had a lot of really good, relevant experience. We solved a lot of great problems. And I think it's about the potential, right? Like, the partnership and the ability to have a similar vision as the rest of the team, I think becomes really important to, do I think this person could be successful in this role?
You talk about potential. I want to segue into operational excellence. What does that mean to you in a finance team context?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like speed to close, speed to forecast, and accuracy. Like, look, we're finance. We need to be spot on with the numbers. There's not a whole lot of margin of error. But I actually think it's, being able to understand the numbers and get out into the business. I think technology is going to upend a lot of, what we do today, and it's going to drive a lot of efficiencies, and people are going to, their jobs are just going to change, right? There's going to be a lot more storytelling with the data, and that's going to require getting out into the business, having your finger on the pulse of the business, and like, where can we optimize? Where are things not going as well as they could? Where can we insert ourselves and be part of the solution? That's how I think of operational excellence. Like, reporting the numbers and being accurate, I think these days are table stakes, and doing it quickly. I think the real value unlock for finance teams becomes, how do we get into the business, have more thoughtful and value added conversations, and partner together to come up with solutions to drive the company forward.
Yeah, what's that saying? Like, you can either, when you're trying to get something built at your house, you can either get it fast, you can get it done accurately the first time, or you can get it done cheap, but like pick two of them. I joke, like, with finance, it's like you need accuracy, speed, and predictability. Like, there's no, like, one man voted off the island here.
Yeah, no, what's been interesting is, I've pushed a lot of our parts of our team into, getting more out into the business, and taking on more sort of non-traditional sort of finance problems, like getting really close with go-to-market and understanding what's happening in there. And there's still this, like, belief or sort of ingrained sort of thing where, like, okay, the numbers have to be perfect. They have to be right. Like, everything has to follow this, like, super methodical process. It's like, well, not really, because, we're not going to report these numbers publicly. We may make some decisions on them, but, like, they need to be right enough. They don't need to be perfect and pristine, and seeing people grapple with, like, when do I need to be pretty much perfect, and when can I have a little bit of creative liberty? I think is a tough, it's just a tough mindset switch.
No, I think that's actually a skill of when I have to be, like, directionally close versus, like, it has to be perfect. And knowing, like, when to context switch between those two, it kind of dictates your level of effort towards things.
Yeah, no, totally. And, like, a lot of times, like, I'll stop myself. I'll be looking at something or going through something, and, like, just going down a rabbit hole of, like, how do all these numbers come together? And it's like, wait, what am I trying to achieve here?
Yeah. It's not gonna end up in a better outcome if I get this to within $3, right? Like, we're making a call here.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
Let's talk about navigating a changing P&L, because you've come out the other side of something that I know is probably tough to go through. There's a lot of transformation. At one point, I was looking at the financials. Yext had negative EBITDA margins in 1,400 people, and you stuck it out through exec turnover. The org changed, and it was a real reset that you had to run. So in those darker days, now that you have a little bit of space from it, what kept you in it, and how did you keep the team focused?
Yeah, no, I think the number one thing is the people. Like, you got to love or really enjoy the people that you're working with. So for me, we have, a great team inside the company, and it was really the learning and growth opportunities again. I just sort of looked at, like, okay, Mike is the new CEO. He's laying out, like, his vision of how, he wants to run the company and where he thinks we can go and where he wants to take it. And that was really interesting, really appealing. And, like I said before, a lot of the ways he think and I think are pretty synced up, which makes it, a really easy partnership. So it was really that, right? I liked the people I worked with. I was really interested in the learning and growth opportunities that were going to become available. And, like, it was, 2022, COVID wasn't that far in the rearview mirror, if it was even in the rearview mirror. So, like, we had seen some tough times. Everybody saw some tough times. And I was like, I don't know if it's going to get any easier or better anywhere else. And, like, I'm not, always attracted to things that are easy. The things that are hard, I think, generally are, more appealing to me. So it was really just a mix of, all those things.
We were talking to Craig Conti. He's the CFO of Vera Mobility. So, like, if you've ever been through, like, an Easy Pass or, like, a Sun Pass, they do, like, the ticketing there. And he was saying all these people coming out of school, they all want to work at, like, OpenAI or Google, or used to be Google. And those are all, like, the quote unquote, like, the easier places to work from, like, a rising tide lifts all ships. Like, the work you're doing is still hard. But he's like, and we said this at the top of the podcast, everybody wants those jobs. He's like, go work at the paper mill that's going to be shut down. Go work, like, at a pet food supply manufacturer. Like, the number of opportunities you'll get there, like, you can have this grass is always greener, or you can say, like, I'm going to get to do stuff here that's going to pull me forward 5 to 10 years in my career.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, look, when Mike took over and the situation we were in was, we had negative EBITDA margins, cash flow was slightly positive, and we had, like you said, 1,400 people for a declining growth growth was decelerating, it just wasn't, a long-term viable configuration. So like, there was a lot of tough decisions that needed to be made. And it's like, well, that sounds really hard, and there's going to be a lot of difficult conversations, a lot of tough decisions to make. But for me, it was like, look, if any CFO, if I'm going to be a CFO for the rest of my career, there's going to be good economic cycles and bad economic cycles, and I'm going to need the experience at some point. So why not get it now?
And like, I know you probably hope you're at Yext forever, but like, if you think about what the job market values, they're looking for someone who has been dealt a hand during bad times and can come out the other side. It's kind of like how you think about operating managers over the last 5 years. All they know how to do is hire. They don't know how to downsize a team. They don't know how to get more out of it. So like, that is, having gone through shit is an asset.
Oh no, it completely is. Like, it's funny, like when we were hiring tons and tons of sales reps, in the 30-40% growth days years ago, what we started to see as the market started to shift in like late 18, 19, 20, and we let competitors come up and steal some market share back then, and the sale got a little bit harder, and we hired a bunch of folks that were at software companies that saw explosive growth in 13, 14, 15, 16, and it became really, really challenging for them to be successful in a more competitive environment. And they hadn't been through the scrappy, I need to get out, I need to sell value, I need to demonstrate to the customer how we're going to help them solve problems. Because in the heyday of those companies that were growing 50, 60, 70%, there's just a lot of order taking that was happening. And it's a much different sale when you're in a competitive situation or a tough economic cycle or a really difficult procurement team.
I want that dog who's been selling print newspaper ads for the last 10 years.
Right.
It's easy to cut when the answer is clear. I'm sure there was some stuff when you looked at the P&L, you're like, that's obvious. I think the really hard part, though, is the gray zone, and especially like when the feedback loop takes a while.
Yeah.
How do you think through those things that like are kind of working, but like they're not totally broken? What's your approach to those calls?
Yeah, I mean, like, this is like, I think the hardest part probably of the job, right? Like of, okay, this doesn't feel like it's optimized. And then, okay, what's not optimized? How do you figure out what needs to be done to optimize it? It would be nice for like the data and the metrics to sort of paint a very clear picture of exactly what needs to be done, but then it gets messy, right? Okay, if for example, if sales productivity is the problem, is it a problem because you don't have the right people? Is it a problem in certain geographies? Is it a problem because you don't have the right structure or the right enablement? Or is it a product market fit issue? Or is it things are just too complex? It could be any number of things. And those things, the solutions may vary by sales teams, by geographies, by product focus. And it's just, I think you have to look at the data and see what the data is telling you, but then you got to get out on the ground. You got to go talk to the sales reps. You got to talk to the customers. You got to talk to people in market to collect all the other information that's sort of anecdotal, but a really important part of the overall information gathering and solution ultimately.
You said talking to customers. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, look, it was, we were really transparent really early on that like one of the challenges that we had that led to some of the decline in growth was we got away from our customers a little bit. We weren't great at listening to some of the feedback and we got away from them a little bit. And one of Mike's big initiatives when he took over was really getting back to the customer, understanding what their challenges are, what their pain points are. If they're satisfied, great. What can we do better? If they're unsatisfied, what are we doing wrong and what do we need to do differently? Getting a really good feedback loop from customers, I think, has helped us solve a lot of our challenges around retention and customer success, but it's also helped us accelerate our product roadmap and some of the things that we're focused on. It's given us ideas for potential M&A opportunities. So look, customers are the lifeblood of your business, and having a really good relationship with them, I think is really, really important.
I just wanted to pause and give you credit for that, because it's really cool to hear the CFO saying like, I need to talk to customers too.
Yeah, no, I think having the background at E&Y and being client serving has I've learned a lot about I built a bunch of skills, back then that I can use now to talk to customers, and it's a little bit different because now our ICP is, effectively marketing departments. So it's a little bit different, but yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of marketers are really focused on the numbers and driving pipeline and things like that. So there's some commonalities.
When growth is flattening and the market isn't loving your story, how does your communication as the CFO change?
Yeah, look, I think we were just really transparent about, look, this is what we're seeing. Here's the numbers, right? You're a public company, you're reporting, we report obviously and guide to revenue, EBITDA, EPS, but then we also report retention and ARR. And, there's a lot of things you can do from a SaaS P&L and balance sheet to understand what's happening in that business. But we were just really transparent and saying, look, this is what we're seeing. This is what we're doing about it. And, here's philosophically how we think about running this business. It's not going to all get better in 1 quarter or 2 quarters or 3 quarters. It's going to take some time. And, one of the great things about, our leadership team here is we have a long-term point of view. We're going to do things that are good for the business, that are going to build, sustainable growth over time. You may not get, immediate results, and that's okay. But, we know that what we're building is being built in the right way and, focused on the long-term objectives.
I like that a lot because sometimes people will dance around being transparent or they'll try to construct a story, but
Yep.
that also forces other people to come up with their own story of what they think is going on. So it's like, just give them the truth. That way we're all on the same page as we do this.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And that's like, a really, really important thing, I think, because it makes everything so much easier, right? Like if you're trying to craft a narrative to, draw focus to the things that are going really well and kind of draw focus away from some of the things that may not be going as well, it gets really hard because, does your narrative have to shift, from month to month or quarter to quarter? I like, look, here it is. Here's the numbers. Here's what we said last quarter, and what we learned this quarter that maybe changes our mind on things. It's easy because it's the truth.
Darryl, what role did systems automation or analytics play in getting control of the P&L?
Yeah, it was critical. One of the other things that I think is common of early stage companies, when I first walked in, I think there was probably 50 or 60 people in the company with an Amex card that was just the company paid the bill. And every month the accounting team would get the statements and like hundreds of lines on each credit card statement code, where did this go in the P&L? And like, I didn't even look at what some of the things in the line item detail was. I was just like, this is not going to be sustainable, for many different perspectives. So, eventually we put in a T&E system and kind of, shut that down and found a better solution for the company. But I think it's really important because you need to understand, what's happening in the P&L, where's the cash coming in, where's the cash leaving. So, like I said earlier on, lead to cash was a really important initial initiative that we took on because, when I came in, we had a homegrown billing system and we were only running billing once a month. So like if we were running billing on the 15th of a month and a customer contract closed on the 13th, it would get captured on the 15th. But if they closed on the 20th, you're waiting until the next 15th. Yeah. Now, from just a cash flow perspective, or a working capital perspective, you need systems and automation to be able to do that at scale. And that's where, it became really important to get control over what was happening in the business.
It's funny how many companies are just giving their customers this float that they don't even know they're giving them just because of when they bill them.
Yeah, no, totally. And, following up on aged AR and, making sure that a lot of our customers in the enterprise, they have sophisticated purchasing and procurement systems. They require POs. And if you don't have the PO, that can delay everything. Or if you're not getting to the right contact or you're not sending the invoice to the right place, it just takes a lot of time and effort to tune up the processes to make sure that your cash coming in is as quick as possible.
I remember my last company, we finally set up like a box that at a bank that they could send the checks into, because we were in an industry where people were mailing us paper checks and half of them would get lost in the mail on the way to the office that we didn't actually use. And it was the most frustrating yet rewarding process to see how much our days payable outstanding went down. And we finally got this in order.
When I first started, we were getting a lot of paper checks, but I think over the last 10 years, people have gotten a lot more comfortable with electronic payment methods, which I'm glad, because I definitely had to go. I used to go over to the bank and literally hand them a check.
Yeah, a satchel of checks.
Yeah.
I want to talk about capital allocation decisions that you made. recently, I think you bought two companies pretty recently with the free cash flow that you're spitting off now. Is that right?
Yeah, no, we did. We bought a company called Hearsay Systems in August of 2024, and then we bought a company called Places Scout in February of 2025. So, those were like the first, really real M&A that we did. I think we did one or two deals in like 2013, but this was the first time we were doing M&A as a public company, and it was tough. I probably, even with my experience in transactions, I was comfortable with the diligence side, but had never gotten any experience on the integration side of things, which, we definitely put the team through the ringer, and, our team did an amazing job, getting through that and doing all the work to, be SEC compliant from a disclosure perspective, pro forma financials. So it was pretty tough. It was a challenge, but, at the end of the day, we've got this free cash flow. We've got great EBITDA margins. Should we build? Should we buy? And, getting back to what I was saying before about listening to customers, both of these acquisitions ultimately came from conversations we were having with customers. And, a bunch of our customers for a really long time have been telling us, look, you guys should get into social. Financial services is one of our biggest verticals. Hearsay was doing social media for financial services companies, which comes with a lot of regulation. And, they had the product, and it made sense for us to go into that space. So it was an easy answer to come to, because it made sense and our customers were asking for it. And similarly with Places Scout, a lot of our, what we got from that acquisition was a lot of data and a lot of, technology. And, that data complements the data that we already have really, really well. And again, like a lot of our customers were asking for, data and analytics using this data. So again, it made complete sense for us to buy rather than build.
You mentioned build, buy, and then I think the third leg of the stool is partner. Mm-hmm. As a CFO, how do you go through the gamut of like which avenue should we take here?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a little bit gray, right? Like there's never any sort of perfect spreadsheet that's going to say this is the answer. I think it's looking at, what is the product? Is it a clear adjacency that fits in nicely to our platform, or are we expanding into a new geography that comes with a whole host of new challenges or issues? And, what's the best way to go about doing that? Obviously, valuation in the market is a really important component of that. And then, how long would it take and how much would it cost to build it? Or even could you? Like, do you have the capability in-house? Do you have the capacity? If you do decide to build, is it 6 months? Is it 2 years? And then what does that do to your roadmap? Or what does that do to your EBITDA margins if you do decide to go down the build approach? So there's lots of different things you need to look at. And I think at the end of the day, you just take in all the information and you sort of debate it as an exec team and say, like, look, this is what we think is the best path. And time will tell if it is or if it isn't. But
I like how you said you have to debate it as an exec team. And I also like how you said that the feedback came in from the customers, because that actually makes for a more fruitful conversation as an exec team as you're debating it. Like, let's all bring this back to what the customer values.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to understand, right? Because when you're doing M&A, you're doing it for the potential synergies, right? Like the EBITDA synergies are probably fairly easy to calculate and go get, but are the revenue synergies there? And if they are, that's great. That makes it a really good deal, or could make it a really good deal. And the only way you're going to know that is if are we hearing this from customers? Do we like this new product that we are going to add to our portfolio? Do we think it helps? Can we cross sell this to existing customers that we have? Can we expand the market? Can we do something that's going to accelerate growth? And you can sit in a room and sort of debate that, but I think having really good concrete conversations with customers where or you're at least reasonably confident that the demand is going to be there, I think just helps with the decision-making process.
And like the second you get the deal done, the sell side analysts are going to be looking at like, how does this increase your total addressable market? I'm guessing you had that conversation internally beforehand, right?
Yeah, we do. We talk about, what do we think the market could be for this? Do we think we can expand it? Hearsay, for example, like I said, was really focused on financial services, but are there use cases beyond financial services? Exactly. Same thing with, they were really largely based in the US. Are there opportunities internationally? So yeah, it's definitely part of the evaluation process as you're going through it to understand, what does it do to your TAM and can we actually get out and penetrate it?
I mentioned before, Darryl, that you're approaching 500 million. I think you're around 450 million. We'll just ballpark it for the sake of when people are listening to this. And you're a public company. That's a big number in like absolute terms. But if you compare it to some of the other tech companies out there, it's actually on the smaller side.
Yep.
I'm curious, is that an advantage? Is it a challenge? What does size mean when it comes to like getting attention from the market?
Yeah, I think it's probably an advantage, but it's probably also a challenge, depending on the lens. I think it's an advantage because you sort of, we can fly under the radar a little bit. We can be nimble. We can move quickly. We can build rather quickly. We can buy rather quickly. I think with a lot of the financial flexibility we've created for ourselves with the free cash flow profile and the efficiencies that we've driven throughout the business, we can now pivot a lot quicker. So in those ways, it's an advantage. I think it also becomes a little bit of a challenge when you're talking about, look, we're a public company. We want to attract, really good long-term thinking public investors, and our market cap has been hovering, in the high, just below $1 billion. So like the high, 700, 800 million, 900 million range. And there's some investors that just won't look at you if you're below $1 billion market cap. So that's been, somewhat of a challenge. And then, look, everything you sort of read about in the tech publications is about, the big, multi-billion revenue software companies. So it's hard to get a lot of that attention. So we've got to work really hard on, investor outreach, talking to, firms that'll pick up sell side research coverage. So in that way, it's a challenge. But I think, to me, I think it offsets with the opportunities that you have being a little bit more nimble.
How does the sell side research game work? How do you get people on board to cover the company?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, typically, you when you go through the IPO, there's a bunch of banks, on the IPO, and they'll pick up coverage in conjunction with the IPO. And, that's what we had. But, over time, analysts leave, they rebalance their portfolios. I think some of the banks that were doing coverage on us got acquired. And it's really hard to pick up new coverage. I think you need to be, thinking about capital market transactions, like, doing a convertible or something like that, to where, okay, the investment bank is going to go and, do some work for you, and the research team will effectively pick up coverage in conjunction with that transaction. That's like the number one way. I think apart from that, you really just have to get out, build relationships, tell your story, really get, investors to push the banks that they're working with to pick up coverage. It's really, really difficult.
That's the inside baseball I was looking for, because everybody talks about getting sell side coverage when you IPO. But I'm like, well, what if you're 10, 12 years down the line? Those people probably aren't even at the same banks they were before.
Yeah, no, I think at one point in time we had 7 or 8 covering analysts, and now we're down to 4 because of, look, there's attrition. I think 1 or 2 of them, like I said, got acquired. And, obviously we're not going to be able to do, 4, 5, 6 capital transactions to, build. Maybe over some number of years we could do that, but it's hard to build that back up.
Yeah. What excites you most about the stage that Yext is at today?
Yeah, I think a lot of the really hard work is behind us. I mean, the work is always going to be hard, but, the restructuring, the reorganizing, the, getting back to our core principles, getting, refocused on what's our core set of product offerings, and instilling a lot of discipline in the business. A lot of that is done. That's behind us. And now what we're focused on is, where do we invest for growth? How do we go and look at capital allocation? What M&A opportunities are out there? Where do we want to invest in the business to fund future growth or fuel future growth? One of the really interesting things is we're only in a couple different territories. We've got a pretty big presence in the US, obviously, but really, a very small business in Asia Pacific, and, a decent sized business in EMEA, just focused on, some of the major sort of Western European countries. So there's a lot more of the global market for us to go and penetrate. But our focus has been, let's sort of fix the core operations of the business, get sort of sales productivity and efficiency to where we want it to be, and then think about going out and expanding into other geographies. And then that also opens up, well, do you organically do it? Do you do it through M&A, or do you partner? So we're getting into like the really fun part of the problem solving, future growth type conversations, which I think are way more fun than the, how do we get 20% EBITDA margins?
Yeah. Yeah. And now that you do have free cash flow, like I used to joke that revenue cures a lot of sins, like free cash flow cures a whole lot of sins.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it just creates so much flexibility in our business, right? Like we're not, pressured to do anything because look, we've got, a lot more cash coming in than we have leaving the business. And, as we start to drive more cash coming into the business, that gives us a lot of optionality with, what do we do with that cash? So it's a good place to be just from a stability perspective, and helping employees and customers understand how strongly positioned we are as a business.
Nice. I want to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So I ask every successful person on the podcast, you got to give me one thing you've messed up on the job before.
Yeah, this was probably like 6 months into my time at Yext, and I had gone through and I sort of, uncovered a lot of the skeletons, and I was like, okay, here's the roadmap of what I think we need to fix. And like, we did like a team meeting. There was only like, 8 or 10 people on the team. Many of them were new. And I just went like area by area, account by account of like, here's what we need to do. And here's the roadmap, just go execute it. And it was awful because like I had all the time in the world because like I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I was working every weekend, and I'm like, here's my vision for what needs to happen. If I just give them the roadmap, it'll just get us there faster. And, what I realized was like, they didn't want the roadmap. They wanted to go find the problems, come up with their own solutions and implement their own solutions. And it made a ton of sense because it's like, nobody was telling me what to do. Somebody was just telling me like, hey, this thing's is kind of a mess. Go fix it. It wasn't like, here's the mess, here's the individual problems, and here's what you should do. So from that point on, I learned like, a really important lesson in sort of how, people want to operate.
You were a consultant though. You didn't know any better.
That's right. Exactly.
If you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
I think it's really the relationship element of things. Relationships are so important within the business, outside the business, having good mentors. I probably didn't do enough sort of relationship building and nurturing early on in my career. And it was like the only way I was successful or survived here at Yext because I needed to go talk to a bunch of people that had done things that I hadn't done before and, build out that network and build out those relationships. And it's really how you get things done. Right? Like inside the business, relationships are really important. Having that trust with different business partners becomes really important. And the only way you're going to do that is if you have really good relationships.
It's hard to remind yourself to make the time for relationships outside the company, I find.
So hard. It's so hard. Like, because you're just so caught up in, my to-do list just keeps growing and I like to cross things off, but more things are coming on than I can cross off. And it's one of those like really long-term things that you can do for yourself in your career. If I invest, an hour or two a week in network and relationship building or even relationship maintenance, like it's going to pay dividends, 5, 10, 15 years down the line.
That's a good reminder for everybody because it's one of those things that's super important in the long term, especially when you're going to need help from somebody. Like in the moment, you're like, that is not urgent at all.
Right. And there's no benefit tomorrow. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That too.
The benefit shows up in 10 years, but it's like, who thinks that long?
Yeah, but nobody likes the guy who calls you up like, hey, I'm talking to you in 6 years, Chad. Can you help me with this employee secondary?
Right. Exactly.
All right. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools does your team use to get the job done today?
Yeah. So we use NetSuite for ERP. We use Coupa for procure to pay. We use Navan for travel and expense. We use Zora for billing and RevRec. Salesforce for CRM, but it's kind of not finance. Those are the major ones.
What's the most recent tool you bought?
ChatGPT for the enterprise.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So now, like, we're a public company, right? So, we got to be really careful what we do with financial information.
That's what I was curious about. Like, was there a debate about getting it?
No, I mean, like, well, once our CTO told me that we could push, MNPI into it, and we had the data agreements with OpenAI to make sure that they weren't going to expose the data or train their models on the data, and everybody, including our GC, was comfortable with us doing this. No.
That's cool. You're the first CFO who I've gotten to chat about like buying. The only combos we've had about ChatGPT are like the shadow budgets of like just engineers putting like $20 on a credit card somewhere. It's really neat to hear that like you were able to implement at a public company at scale in a safe way, and it's benefiting.
Yeah, no, it's cool because like we've given licenses to a bunch of folks on the team and just have encouraged the experimentation. One of the folks on our team told me the other day that they built a treasury GPT. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's kick ass. Last one I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever had someone try to expense?
Like I said before, all those credit cards that had all those lines of, I didn't even want
You don't even know. You didn't want to open it.
Exactly. So like, I didn't look at that, but like more recently, I saw a flight come through that was like, a one-way flight to Europe and then a different return city. And the flight was, probably like 3 or 4 times the costs you would expect. And I was just like, what is happening here? And, I reached out to the person that booked it and their EA. And I was like, can you please help me understand? So that hasn't happened again.
Someone was going to Barcelona for tapas.
Yeah, maybe for an exorbitant price.
Darryl, this has been a blast. Thanks for sharing all your insights and carving out time for us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate CJ. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great time.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.